Dear colleagues, the British Presidency of the Committee of Ministers has proposed to organize jointly a roundtable on media freedom and on the Internet. This agenda item is open to the media and will be transmitted live to the Internet, via Internet. Our committee very much appreciates the direct cooperation between the Committee of Ministers and the Assembly on this important subject and in general. I warmly welcome Madam Ambassador Eleanor Fuller, Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom to the Council of Europe and the Chairperson of the Ministers' Deputy of the Committee of Ministers, Ms. Kirsty Hughes, Chief Executive of Index on Censorship in London, who will moderate the roundtable, Mr. Bill Echikson, Head of Free Expression at Google Europe, Mr. Simon Milner, Director of Policy at Facebook United Kingdom. Hello. Here. And Mr. Felix Treguer, Director of Institutional and Legal Affairs, La Quadrature du Net in Paris. May I give the floor to Madame Ambassador Fuller.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm delighted to be here, and thank your committee very much for creating this opportunity. Freedom of expression on the Internet is one of the priorities of the United Kingdom's chairmanship of the Committee of Ministers. The overall theme of our chairmanship is the promotion of human rights in Europe. We believe that the freedom of expression is just as applicable online as offline, and the same human rights provisions should apply to online debate as to offline debate. So we're very, very happy to have this occasion to have a round table and discuss some of the really important issues around this question. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here and that Index on Censorship could take part in this event and that I can be here to moderate this panel. The Council of Europe and this committee in particular obviously is extremely important in freedom of expression and wider democracy and rights issues, and as the Internet becomes an ever bigger and wider part of our lives, both personal and professional, then working out all the different freedom of expression and related issues online as well as offline, as the Ambassador has just said, is clearly one of the big issues and one of the big debates of our time. So I'm delighted that we can have this panel with the committee. So thank you again to the committee. I'm delighted it's also being streamed online and that it's an open session, and so we have other participants in the room as well. I want to invite the panel to speak relatively briefly, because I think because there are so many issues where there are different views or where we all can, sometimes admit to uncertain views so far, I think an interactive debate is what we want to have. I just want to take 1 minute or maybe a minute and a half to highlight one or two topics, and then I will introduce our three speakers, who will take about 5 minutes each, and then we'll open it out to brief questions, comments, answers from the panel. I think it's probably self-evident, but I will say it again, the Internet has been in many ways a huge plus to freedom of expression and the opening up of discussion, debate and democracy in our time, not least in its ability to go cross borders, to bring together more rapid, wider sources of information analysis and views, and whether we're looking at digital activism like Avaz, all the components of the Arab Spring, or self-publishing, whether cultural or political, we're all aware of that. But we also know from our experience even before the digital age, so whether online or offline, whether it's governments or international bodies such as the Council of Europe and many others, or corporations, all impact on freedom of expression, and that can be in positive ways, it can be in negative ways. Some of the big issues at the moment, and they're being discussed at key fora at the moment in the last few months, in the coming months, are clearly around the questions of net governance. It's a very important debate. Freedom of expression, as you know, it's a fundamental right, but there are some constraints in all countries on freedom of expression. But I think there are potentially major risks of governments, in some cases deliberately, in others by mistake, going too far in either constraining freedom of expression, when you look at the debates I'm sure our panel will talk about around takedown, the responsibility of intermediaries relative to final authors, issues around monitoring and surveillance, excessive intrusion into privacy. Privacy is a freedom of expression issue. It's not just something that goes against freedom of expression. Copyright issues, again, don't just read across necessarily from non-digital to digital. So a number of issues. And then for us as a civil society organization, what are the interests of individual citizens? What is the power not only of governments, but also of the big corporations? Sometimes, obviously a big force for driving the internet forward, but the policies of Facebook or Google can impact enormously on freedom of expression on the net, as well as the policies of government and international organizations. So we can talk about privatization to some extent of freedom of expression, regulation and boundaries as well. I think that's more than enough from me, but those are some of the sort of difficult issues and debates that I would highlight. And I'll just now move straight on to our three speakers, who your chairman has already introduced, so I won't redo the introduction, but I'll invite Bill Echikson from Google to go first. Bill.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Thank you very much for inviting me to this institution and to be able to speak on these important issues. I think it's important for all of you to understand that there really is a growing threat to the freedom on the internet. And the figures show that out. As governments realize the power of the internet, as they see what happened in the Arab Spring, or they see how everyone can now express themselves on the net, they are getting increasingly frightened. A decade ago, according to the Open Net Initiative, 4 countries, governments in 4 countries controlled, filtered, or censored the net. Last year, the figure was 40 countries, and it's growing. At Google, we are operating in about 150 countries around the world, and at any one time, in 25 of them or so, our products are blocked or hindered, access to them is hindered. It can be different products, YouTube in various countries, or it can be maps even, it can be Blogger, but the common thread is more and more difficulty for our users in many places to reap the benefits of the internet. I think it's important also that you note that this isn't a problem just in the usual suspects in Asia or Africa. It's a problem here in Europe too, in a different way, perhaps not, there's not the same scale, but in places like Italy, we have had 3 of our employees convicted for a video that went up on Google Video, which they didn't produce, they didn't approve, and when the police told us about it, we took them down. That was a conviction on violating privacy laws, so I think that's the type of issue there. We have cases in Spain, we have cases all over Europe on these type of responsibilities that would threaten to make us liable for all the materials being put up on our platforms. So what do we do about this? I mean, it would take a long time for me to go through Google's policies, but our default position is in favor of freedom of expression. We will take down material if we receive a legitimate court order, but we'll try to narrow that order. And importantly, we'll be transparent about it. We publish something called a transparency report, where we detail the requests that we get from governments to take down content or hand over information on users. It's called the Google Transparency Report. You can Google it. And we break that down by the type of agency that is trying to remove this material from the web and so forth, from what of our platforms that it is being tried to be removed, and importantly, with how many times we comply with those requests. We think this is, more transparency will ensure, is a good insurance for more freedom and more access to the net. Another thing that we do is we started with Microsoft and Yahoo and NGOs like Index, who's a member now, and academics like the Bergman Center in Harvard, the Global Network Initiative. This was designed to set common rules in how we should respond to the government requests to take down information or hand over user requests, to prevent us from all trying to chase and do more to please governments. I think this has been a powerful institution. It just completed its first independent audits of the companies that are members, but so far, no European company has joined us. And that's a real weakness for the organization. If this issue becomes an American issue, it will not, it will be easier for it to be tagged as something that is bad or at least isolated. So we really need as much support from Europe, both the corporate sector and governments, in protecting freedom of expression. And that's why I, in the end, have come here to ask you for your support.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Bill. You've managed to raise a lot of really sharp issues in a very concise presentation. But now invite Felix Treguer to speak. He's from a civil society organisation, La Quadrature du Net, which focuses on the digital world and human rights issues. Felix.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll make my introductory remarks in French for the sake of cultural diversity. Merci beaucoup de l'invitation.
Thanks very much for the invitation. It's a privilege to be able to represent the Quadrature du Net here in such a prestigious gathering. But I'd like to focus initially on the way in which Internet and Internet users are losing their innocence. We see people seeking to reclaim the Internet now, get a hold of it. In the 90s, it was supposed to be a sovereign area, which was an area of joyous anarchy where national authorities would not encroach. Now, that was a utopian image, and let's remember what was said at, in Davos in '96 by Barlow, former spokesperson for an American group, and they were the first NGO to defend freedom on the Internet in their foundation. And then we found, as of 2000, people seeking to subject the Internet to national rules and laws. We see in authoritarian regimes and in democratic regimes, and I want to focus on the democratic regimes, which are supposed to respect the rule of law, we see a mode of regulation which does violence to people's freedoms. And the idea is to change the technical structure of Internet, which is designed to be a worldwide network. There are systems of blocking Internet in Europe and elsewhere in the world. We've seen that particularly in Europe recently, measures of surveillance, collection of the personal data of Internet users. All these practices that do not seem to be in line with the principle of the rule of law. I won't go into too much detail, but Mr. Frank Leroux, the UN rapporteur on freedom of expression, made the point very eloquently in his last report on freedom of expression on the Internet. And in the 90s, the wave of freedom that we saw has emerged then, has now tailed off somewhat. And now if we look at hackers in the original sense of the term hacker, not the Internet pirates, groups of hackers such as anonymous hackers, these people, despite the rather belligerent terminology we hear, they're referred to as terrorists. But the anonymous group is really difficult to define in clear terms. But we've got denials of service attacks on various sites. It's the modern equivalent of a sit-in, if you like. And the anonymous participants feel that what's going on is actually undermining Internet freedom. And people came out in the streets this winter against the anti-counterfeiting moves being made by the European Parliament, the APTA. And in fact, thousands of European citizens objected to the agreement, which seeks to create a sort of privatized internet, claiming to respect copyright in so doing, so that internet users are getting together to try and make the point. We've seen that in Swedish telecomics. They're trying to lobby their own politicians to get this message through. But the users, as I say, are no longer innocents. So for all the legislators, the policy makers, there's a huge responsibility involved. They have to take account of citizens' movements seeking to protect the freedom of the internet. And there is an obligation on national legislatures to enact laws which are correct and respect the rule of law. In this area, as in others, in fact, many democratic regimes are not compliant with rule of law in the way that they seek to regulate what happens on the internet. And they are, in fact, fettering the fundamental rights of internet users. So you need resolute action. In the Council of Europe, we see you are one of the international organisations doing most to support freedom of expression. There is a need for legislative scrutiny to protect internet freedom. And I hope that it'll be possible to identify areas where we can make progress along those lines.
I think the emphasis on this issue, that it's an issue for democratic states as well as totalitarian states, is one that's going to come back again and again and again. It's very easy to focus on the China and the Great Firewalls, but actually unless we know what we're doing in democratic states and getting it right for us, we're going to miss a huge part of the crucial bits in defending our rights. So last but not least, on these initial comments, Simon Milner, who's Director of UK Policy for Facebook. Simon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I just want to talk about three things briefly. One, about Facebook and freedom of expression. Secondly, about how Facebook interacts with law enforcement and national speech laws. And thirdly, about UK government plans around internet and communications surveillance, which echo some of the things that Felix was saying. In terms of Facebook and our position on freedom of expression, we have now recently released our numbers showing there are just over 900 million monthly active users and 500 million people using Facebook every day around the world. And we see plenty of evidence of people using Facebook to realize their human rights, including freedom of expression, across social, economic, cultural, civil and political aspects. From the Arab Spring to growing a small business virally, from sharing music playlists with friends via Spotify and Deezer, to letting the world know you are safe after a natural disaster. And we think there are three features of the Facebook environment that underpin our ability to enable people to express themselves freely. One is it is a free service. It's paid for by advertising based on the data provided by our users, but being a free service, that means that anybody can use Facebook. We do have a real identity policy, and I know that not everybody likes that, but we think it's essential for freedom of expression. Facebook is not a broadcast environment, it's a conversation, and conversations are much more real if you can have trust that the person you are talking with and the people you're engaging with, you know who they are and you know them in the offline world. And last but not least, our community standards. We believe that expression and conversation is freer when people feel safe, when they're safe from threatening behavior, from hate speech and from pornography, and that they feel respected. So we believe those three things enable Facebook to be a very good platform for freedom of expression. Facebook does interact with law enforcement and is subject to national speech laws. Our general practice is that we will comply with local speech laws where they are consistent with international standards. And we do so, therefore, on a notice and takedown basis. So we will respond to court orders or requests from authorities when they demonstrate there's a legal basis for their approach. The key thing here is that we block on a geographic basis, unless something falls of our community standards, then is blocked around the world. But if, for instance, there is an issue to do with a particular form of speech, for instance, Holocaust denial in some European states, if we are notified of such material and we block it, we only block it in terms of access in those countries, not around the world. And the third thing I wanted to touch on was the news about the UK government's plans for introducing new legislation around surveillance and access to communications data. We haven't yet seen the detail of this. We recognise that there are legitimate national security concerns for some online users and their activity. We understand the government's plans are well advanced and that we should see a draft bill very soon. One thing we would say about this is it's important that the UK government, indeed any governments in this space, do not legislate in haste. There is plenty of experience of governments doing this and then regretting things down the line, often at length, and having to unpick speech laws that simply don't work. And therefore we think it's important in the UK there is proper pre-legislative scrutiny about any plans in this space which enable a meaningful exchange of views amongst all the stakeholders, not just the companies involved or their users, but also NGOs and the full range of interests. I hope that's a useful introduction to Facebook's views on these issues.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you to all of our panel. I think they've raised a whole host of issues. I'm sure we will have quite a lot of comments and questions. So can I encourage you to either respond with some comments, but as a moderator always urges, briefly and concisely, or to put some direct questions, and maybe I'll take a couple of people at a time and then ask for brief reactions from our panel to promote maximum interactions. To start with the lady at the front and then the gentleman over there. We'll start with you.
Une petite question.
A minor question, if I may, a little question to Mr. Echikson.
I know you've got name
I'm sorry.
We don't know where you're from and so on.
Muriel Marlan.
Muriel Marlan, and I'm a Member of Parliament for the Alpes-Maritimes in France. Now, the question I wanted to put to you wasn't raised here, but we are concerned by it too. When it comes to freedom of expression, that presupposes pluralism. You can't have freedom without choice. So how do you think it will be possible to combine the hegemony of certain platforms with the need for pluralism in expression? And the second question, if I can get that in now, and I put this to Facebook, if I may, you rightly pointed out the fact that governments frequently work under pressure of time. Well, in fact, there's a possible reason for that, if not an excuse, that technological progress doesn't stop for them. And there are therefore requirements on users, on platforms, and sometimes it is necessary to move forward rapidly. So governments are trying to catch up with the problem. That could explain some of the haste and poor quality of some of the decisions.
And then I'll come back to the panel.
Thank you, Chair. I would like a question also to Mr. Echikson to begin with. He spoke a lot of trustworthy words about transparency and respecting notice and takedown procedures. And that sounds very well. But what do you mean with this transparency? How far you go? Which technical procedures you will open for the public? Are the people informed who put steps on your webs?
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to the second round of questions in a second, but get some immediate responses. Bill.
Je pense que c'est à moi.
I think it probably falls to me to reply initially. The first question, I think, was to do with competition, pluralism, and so on. Now, I believe that there are a number of ways of finding information on the internet, Google being just one of them. But now you can see that there are many searches done via Facebook. For example, people looking for restaurants, looking for opinions, looking for friends. They can use Facebook to do that. If you're looking for something to read, you look on Amazon. If you're seeking to book travel arrangements, you'll go to Expedia, for example. But it's a good question. But I think it avoids the real problem of pluralism, which is the fact that internet allows all of us to express ourselves. Before that, only a small elite had the ability and power to express itself. Now, all of us can self-publish. You can do it, I can do it. When I was a journalist, before I joined Google, I had to, type out my article and wait for it to be sent to the US. No longer does that apply. There's much more flexibility now, unless governments seek to tame what's going on.
I think it's also a really good question. I think this is an area where Europe can be in ahead of the United States because you have very strong freedom of information laws. What we do is we say that we only put up the requests that we get from authorities, from courts, police. We don't give the details of them. We give the numbers and what type of where they come from in the government and what type of information they want taken down on what platform. But it doesn't reveal personal names or anything like that. Do take a look at the Google Transparency Report to get an idea. I do think this is something that European governments could do. We're just one company. It's useful what we put out, but imagine if an entire government committed to publishing in an available way the information on what requests have been made in their country for takedowns and for user information. I think that'd be a very powerful tool for progressing freedom of expression.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting idea because an organisation like Index on Censorship is not always going to agree with governments on where they draw the line, but if we're transparent about the lines, it's important for our debates. Simon, did you want to come in, and then Felix, if you have any comments?
I recognise what you say in regard to governments running to catch up with technology changes. I still don't think that excuses bad law, and I'm sure you'd agree with that. It seems to us at Facebook that the key here is international cooperation. And actually, I echo what Bill says about the value of governments coming together to consider how they could be more transparent in this space, because I think that would then encourage organisations, including our own, to perhaps follow Google in respect of our transparency. But it's one of the things we have a concern about is if it's only companies that are transparent, it implies that we are the problem. And I think there needs to be some collective endeavour here to make to improve transparency across the board. And perhaps by doing so, that will encourage better behaviour by companies, yes, but also by individual countries without the need for legislation.
Okay. Felix, did you want to comment?
Yes, just to add the idea that, of course, we need transparency on government requests for private information or requests for taking down specific content. But you also have to keep in mind that maybe the most of the content that is being taken down of online servers is being taken down because a private party, so it might be a rights holder, it might be an organization or an individual, has sent out a notice and takedown request to a hosting company, for instance, or an online platform. And usually, when this content is being taken down, we don't have any visibility of, the sort of the size of the phenomenon. We don't know who is asking for takedown, why the company or the hoster has conceded and chosen to take that content down. And there's a lot of a big lack of transparency on notice and takedown requests. And in the US, Google and other online platforms along with different law schools and NGOs, have put together an online platform called chillingeffects.org, where hosting provider publicize the request they receive, so that there's some transparency on what content is being taken down, who has sent it, when the identity is not a problem and it can be published, and on what grounds. Is it copyright? Is it defamation, etc.? And in Europe, we don't have any visibility on that. The EU Commission is currently working on the matter. I think they're aware of the problem. They have not hinted to any solution so far, but at least they're aware of the problem. But I think it's something we really need to work on.
Okay, thank you very much. I have 3 members of the committee who've indicated they want to come in, and 4, but also, want to invite people, yes, also who are not members of the committee and who are in this public meeting, so I'll bring them in too. But I'll start with Madam Bergamini.
Grazie, sono...
Thank you. I'm Deborah Bergamini. I'm an Italian Member of Parliament for a constituency in Tuscany.
Echikson.
In English or French? No.
No, I will use Italian.
Sure.
Grazie.
Thank you. My question to Mr. Echikson concerns something he said, because he referred briefly to a case in Italy. 3 Google managers were found guilty for Google having published a video. It was a video of a Down's syndrome child who had been maltreated by classmates. Now, that's a very important case to understand exactly what we're talking about, because that video was taken down by Google as soon as they realized it was online. But there were 2 months during which it was uploaded. So you can imagine the damage this may have done during that time. And so I think the court ruling was very important indeed, because it went to the very heart of the issue. Whose responsibility is it if material is uploaded and then disseminated in a platform such as Google? Who has editorial responsibility? And that's why I'm putting the question, because when it comes to the issue of lack of clarity about who has editorial responsibility about what is available via a platform, what we have to do, of course, is to protect freedom of expression on the net. We all agree about that. But in order to do that, you have to have clear lines of responsibility. And I ask this, in the light of Google's experience, is the degree of knowledge sufficient at this time, the knowledge of the platform users when they upload material? We have terms of service published. Do you believe that they are sufficient today to provide protection and guidance for those who are uploading material and those who are viewing material? A platform such as Google is, of course, making a profit on people using other people's material in some way. So we have to look at where the liability lies. Thank you.
I think it's going to help this flow if you take a couple at a time. So we're just going to ask Mr. Sveinsson was next, please, and then we'll come back to the panel.
Yes, I'd like to thank you all. My name is Gunnar Sveinsson from the Icelandic Parliament. I'd like to ask you about information that companies gather. Now, I think it is a fact that companies like Google, Facebook, YouTube, they gather information of the users of this, their service. When I search for fishing, I get lots of fishing goods on my computer, but when my brother searches, he's got boats. So your company are gathering information, learning what we are doing on the internet. I worry about that. I also like to ask about this information you are gathering and you are learning about our behavior. What do you do with them? Do you sell them, and to whom do you sell them?
Okay. Okay, I'll start with Bill, but I will, responsibility and
Poking
users, I think, is for all the panel. So,
Okay,
Bill.
and poking is definitely for Simon. Thank you for the question. I don't think, I disagree with some of the facts that you presented. The European e-commerce law is very clear on the responsibilities for platforms, and we think it's appropriate. And in the case in Italy, the actual fact was we took it down very, very quickly once the police notified us of it. So, and that is what the European e-commerce directive calls for. It says once you're notified of this, you have a responsibility to take it down. The issue involved in Italy and cases that we have in Spain and other companies too would put us in an obligation to preview and filter everything going up. Now, 60 hours of video is going up every minute on YouTube now. Hundreds of thousands of words on Blogger. This is the richness of the web. If we follow what happened in Italy or what Spain is asking, it will be destroyed. I mean, basically, in our opinion, you were persecuting the postman for delivering a letter that you don't like the contents of, or that violates the law. You don't throw the postman in jail. So that's my basic answer to that, to your question. And
Hi. The other part of the question was whether you believe that there's enough knowledge on the part of the users about terms of service. If they are sufficiently responsible and know which sort of obligations.
well, I think we've done a lot of work, I know in Italy in particular, to try to inform users and promote child safety and to work on these issues, and certainly that's all to the good. But I think that the bottom line is if you put restrictions on the internet, you threaten freedom of expression on the internet. And the internet has been a vehicle for freedom of expression, unlike almost any before. So we're very concerned. We're appealing the case in Italy, and we are very, very concerned that 3 of our employees have been convicted for basically being a postman. Should I let someone else understand the other issues?
Simon and then Felix, why don't you want to comment on some of these other issues or on the responsibility issue as well?
I think I'll address the issue about data because I suspect it's mainly addressed in my direction, Facebook's direction. Yes, we have lots of data on our hundreds of millions of users, and indeed that's because they provide it to us. So we only use data that they provide to us. We don't sell that data to anyone else. It is used to target advertising in a way that we think makes the experience of Facebook particularly helpful for our users. And more importantly, particularly helps often very small businesses use Facebook as a platform to highly target their advertising. So they can spend just 50, 100 euros in order to really target their advertising very locally often on people who they know are most likely to want their products or services, and that will help them grow. So we think there are lots of good reasons, good ways in which we use that data, and where we know certainly that our users understand that. They understand the terms of trade, that they are getting a fantastic free service, and in return for that, we get their data and serve them advertising. In terms of freedom of expression, it also enables us to provide a platform that people can freely express themselves within some limits. So there are limits that we provide in terms of our community standards. I think most people understand those and never butt up against our community standards because they're not threatening people. They're not contributing hate speech or linking to hate speech, and they're not trying to put pornography onto the site. So most people, although they're probably aware we have community standards, they don't butt up against them in the way that some users do.
Okay, Felix. No particular
Except to say that,
okay.
I mean, the record of Facebook in terms of freedom of expression is not ideal, far from it. There's the debate around anonymity and the use of pseudonyms on the platform. And sometimes the limits allowed by the terms of service are blurry, and I heard about Facebook accounts of political activists being suspended in different parts of the world, and And I think that requires a proactive policy to support freedom of expression on the part of your company.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Frank, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Franz, and I am member of Parliament of Slovak Republic. On one side is right and freedom of information. On the other side is responsibility and correct of information. And so I have a question concerning the ethical aspects, particularly social nets Facebook, because it's very easy to shift the information, false information, to push on a keyboard, and the information is widespread to thousands people. And of course, it is abused, for example, during the election, and there are procedures during the justice and so on, but everything is passé, because it's after the election. And from that point of view, we have a question how to protect the true information through social net. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to invite Mr. Gale as well to make his comment and then come back to the panel.
Thank you. Later on this afternoon, I am required to present a report on internet freedom. The Russian delegation tabled an amendment to that report, which is not in fact moved, seeking to protect governments from the misuse of the internet for terrorists and other related purposes. That amendment was not accepted by the committee, but I have some sympathy with it, and we have had great difficulty with this report. Simon Milner, in his opening remarks, touched upon, as many do, the Arab Spring, the use of the social media in the Arab Spring uprisings is cited as an example of how the internet can be used to good democratic advantage. Much less frequently cited is the London summer, when the same social media was used to incite criminal violence. And I'd like to hear from the panel how they feel that this can properly be addressed, so that on the one hand, governments can't pass laws that say it is an offence to annoy the government, while on the other hand, we don't just give a free-for-all platform to terrorists and criminals.
Okay, thank you very much. And I mean, I think it's clear, you know, a lot of these issues, we've discussed these issues offline, you know, for the offline world, and they're very tricky, and they're about balance. And I think what the online adds to that is that sometimes we're then talking about, for instance, a much wider range of data and the ability to intrude into privacy. So it's the same and it's different. But I'll start with Simon this time.
Just on the latter point, certainly in terms of the London riots, there was a lot of talk at the time, including from the UK Prime Minister David Cameron, that perhaps social media, kind of telecom networks perhaps ought to be closed, that the police ought to have the authority to close them down. Thankfully, he and the other political exponents of this kind of retreated from that post the riots and recognised that actually that would not necessarily be helpful. And indeed, much of what happened after the riots in terms of the clean-up, organised by ordinary citizens, was done through social media. So one absolutely recognises that, like any communications medium, these things can be used for good and for bad. One thing I would say about our kind of platform, particularly because of the way we cooperate in terms of the rule of law and law enforcement in the UK, is that a number of people who took part in the riots have been brought to justice as a result of proper legal proceedings for getting access to their data communications. So in the same way as with the UK government's plans, we absolutely recognise this as an important policy issue. There needs to be proper dialogue. We are certainly not saying this should not happen at all. It's all about checks and balances, as with much of this debate. I hope that helps address your question. In terms of what happens during elections, well, it's been interesting during the recent French national elections. One of the things that it was a very active campaign on Facebook. And one of the things that each one of the presidential candidates had to effectively close down or or put a stop on their Facebook pages during the final day before the vote. And so, like with many things in this territory, politicians and other campaigning groups are learning about how to use these platforms effectively, and also learning from mistakes. And that's often what happens in this area. People learn from mistakes and realize, actually, we need to ensure that there is good practice. You can't stop individuals cutting across that, but in terms of those people who are involved typically in the political debate, one can expect that people will learn and realize how we can use these properly while respecting the law.
Thank you. Felix.
Yeah. To react to what was being said about fears of rumors and misinformation or disinformation. This is the fighting against rumor is being used by the Chinese authorities as a way to expand their control of internet communications, and especially on social networks. And indeed, governments or some of them are afraid of seeing the citizenry propagate information that might be regarded as false or rumors. I think the impact that such information have on public opinion is to an extent a factor of the distrust that the citizens have towards their government. Rumors and false discourse and erroneous discourse can propagate when the people don't know where to look for truth and when they don't trust their government. And I mean, it's a really hard question, and I don't have a definitive answer to the point that is being made through this amendment. But I think that an open discussion and an open platform for discourse is the best way to sort out truth from false discourse.
Okay, thank you. And Phil, some comments.
I think my colleagues or co-conspirators here have expressed it, my opinion as well, and I support what they say. I think basically it comes down to the offline rules that we have are sufficient even in the online environment.
Okay. I mean, and I think one issue that I would add here, though, is we've heard from Facebook and Google and from Bill and Simon about responding to national law, but of course, certainly from the Index on Censorship point of view and from the point of view of press freedom, for instance, national laws are not always ones that we consider are fully respecting human rights and freedom of expression, and the issue, for instance, of journalists protecting their sources, whereas we know journalists have sometimes gone to prison to protect their sources, but they may not have the choice if Google is holding the sources. So, there are other issues.
We face these choices, and famously in China, and our decision was clear that we will not censor content. We will not be put in the position of censoring Google. And that is something that we will stick to. That's the red line.
What you did for a long time, didn't you? I mean, when
yes,
I went to China and I typed Tiananmen, and the pictures that were presented on Google Image were not necessarily reflective of what's being most popular when you type Tiananmen on Google in other states that do not censor online communications.
Okay.
Just to be clear, I mean, I was in Europe when the continent was divided, and I remember the Helsinki Accords and the free flow of information, and I had the similar impression when Google went into China. We were balancing whether to be there would provide more information and or less. And yes, we agreed to submit to the censorship, but at the same time we would say that each search was censored. And then for a variety of reasons, culminating in an attack on human rights activists using Gmail, we decided that the balance it was out of whack, and that there was no choice but to change our policy. So we changed, and now all sorts of searches are directed through Hong Kong, where there is no censorship.
Okay, thank you. I just want to bring in a couple of voices from beyond the committee, since you've opened this out, and then I will come back to the committee. So I've got the lady at the back, Pavana, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Parvana Prisyani. I'm a social media activist from Azerbaijan. And I have a question for the representative of Facebook regarding some issues that we observed back in my country. These issues are related to mobile security when the users, they cannot receive the SMS texts while trying to enter to their accounts from another device. And I just want to bring to your attention that the mobile operators are under total state control in Azerbaijan. So there are 3 main mobile operators, and one of them actually belongs to the presidential family, and another 2 they are also controlled by the state and by presidential administration. And we had several cases when the activists, civil society activists, they were called to the prosecutor's office, and their inbox messages were printed out and shown to them. And I just want to know your opinion on this, on the level of the security of Facebook users. And another issue, whether you are considering to launch some function facilitating the protection campaign of the jailed social media activists. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. A question from the user end, so the coalface, if you like. I'll also bring in this gentleman here.
Yes, I am a member of the committee, but my interests are not really so much in this area as a member of the committee. I was very glad that we brought someone in who was a user, because basically we're looking here at people who make money out of
sorry, could you give us your name? I can't actually
my name
see.
is Michael Connaughton. I'm a member of the UK Parliament, a member of the committee. What we're looking here is at people who make money out of the internet. I love all this stuff about we're here to guide and fight for the wee guy. No, we're not. We're here to make money. Google's here to make money. Facebook's here to make money. I'm not quite sure where Mr. Treguer makes money. Yeah, an NGO, good for you. But really, this is what it's about. It's about the capture of a new media by people who want to make money. That's what it's about. And I'm sad to hear Simon say that he might have provided information to the government during that last period of unrest in the UK. I don't in any way support criminality, but among all these people, and some who went to jail, were people who wanted to go out and protest in the streets. A young man from Scotland got 4.5 months for putting something on Facebook saying, let's have a demonstration or a riot in Glasgow. No one took him up on it, but he got 4.5 months in jail. Now, you talked about not putting people in jail for being the postman. They didn't used to put you in jail for writing letters, but they now put you in jail for writing Google messages or Facebook messages or blogging if they catch you. Because the reality is, and I worry about what the UK is doing, who is a terrorist? Who's a terrorist? One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. I said it yesterday, I was speaking in the chamber. We applaud about active citizenship. We all stood up and applauded and cheered and pointed out the terrible things happening in Syria and in Egypt, etc. But when our young people are on the streets, we call them people who are doing something illegal. And I just worry there's a collusion between wanting to maintain the money flowing by the providers of these services, really, and governments who want to oppress people. And Azerbaijan, funny, is featured in my speeches recently as well, as somebody tries to take over a youth movement for a political party or for the government. Because I think governments are naturally, when they are not doing well, afraid of their own citizens. And I think you shouldn't censor what people have to say, and you shouldn't put people in jail for saying it.
Okay, thank you. A couple of very tough and big questions. Bill, do you want to start, please?
I'd agree with most of what you said, almost everything that you said, and I accept the fact that we're complicit in doing that. We don't hand over information. We're transparent about it when we do, and we do it only when we're forced to. Our default position is really not to do it and to limit. Whenever we get these requests from government, we often fight them, and we try to limit them. And I think our record is really pretty good on this. I mean, in the end, we need to keep the trust of our users. they can move away with one click. And if they believe that we're going to send their material or abuse it, we're going to be in big trouble.
Okay, Simon.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I don't know about the detail of Azerbaijan. It does sound like a pretty complex set of relationships, particularly in terms of mobile networks, and indeed it does raise issues about whether, when it comes to issues around the open internet, some of the ways in which mobile telecoms markets work and the practices of mobile telecoms companies create more of a challenge actually for free expression than perhaps some of the people who are on this table here, and certainly in terms of some of the fixed networks. So I'm afraid I can't answer the direct question, but I'd be happy to exchange details with you afterwards so we could follow that up and see if we can find out more about it for you. I wasn't quite sure what you meant in terms of a new function to protect the identity of imprisoned activists. Certainly we have arrangements in a number of countries with trusted sources who will alert us if they feel that, if they believe that an activist is under threat, and we can take action in respect of that person's account in order to protect them. So it could well be this is something we could also, again, have a conversation about to see if we might introduce a similar approach in Azerbaijan. On the issue of are we only here to make money, we are private companies, and we can't live on fresh air alone. Actually, our purpose is not to make money. Our purpose is to make the internet more open and to enable people to communicate freely, which is the primary thing that we do. We absolutely do not work with governments to oppress people. We have not volunteered people's details to the UK authorities in respect of last summer's riots. The police asked us under agreed procedures for details that we provided. We do not volunteer that kind of information. But we also find, one of the things about Facebook is it's a social environment in which typically users will identify somebody they believe is behaving badly. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to discover when it came to those cases, those people were actually identified to the police by other users.
Okay, and Felix.
Yeah, to answer both questions, certainly in Europe and in democratic states, there is a double standard in terms of what's being advocated on the international relations. When you look at Hillary Clinton's speech 2 years ago on internet freedoms, when you look at the initiatives of the Swedish and Dutch governments on internet freedoms, like there are diplomatic efforts going on to promote freedom of expression and fundamental rights on the internet worldwide and through international relations. The fact of the matter is, many of the systems for surveillance and censorship that are being used in authoritarian regimes come from Western companies. Nokia Siemens provided tools to the regime in Iran. We discovered in a bunker in Tripoli a full room equipped with technologies from a French company called Amesis. And there's clearly a lot of things that need to be done in terms of both the laws that are being adopted and implemented by democratic governments, and also the way some companies export tools that are being used to repress dissidents and political activists in Azerbaijan and in other region of the world. And there's a big debate about establishing export controls on the export of repressive technologies. And I know the EU Parliament is working on the question, and there's a lot of things to be done. But just to give you an idea, the market for these sort of technologies was non-existent 10 years ago. Now it's worth $5 billion. There are fair trade where these companies present to intelligence services coming from all around the world systems that are marketed as unlawful, as allowing the interception of communications outside any judicial framework or anything like that. And the French government last year invested through its sovereign fund 30 million euros in 3 companies that develop this kind of surveillance and censorship systems. So there's a lot of money being made out of repression and online censorship, and that needs to change.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this fruitful conversation and for all your contributions. Thank first of all to Madam Ambassador and for her team, so to say. So as you know, the Internet story is the never-ending story, and this is just one of the steps toward the needed regulation of it. And we will need your expertise, of course, in the future to see how to do it in the best way, to keep the freedom and then also to keep the privacy of those who are on the net in this way or on that way. Thank you once again. We have to resume our activity in the semi-cycle, and the committee meets again tomorrow. Thank you.